This is the November 2015 Tech Talk session on IMC Supervisor version 1.1. My name is Kevin Egan. I'm a technical marketing manager here at Cisco Systems in the CSPG, the Solutions and Product Group. I'm joined with a few of my fellow colleagues today. We'll start by going around for introductions. Jeff?
Thank you, Kevin. My name is Jeff Foster. I'm a product manager for IMC Supervisor.
Nitya?
Hi, everybody. I'm Nitya Natation. I'm a technical marketing engineer with the Cisco UCS business unit.
And finally, Arun?
Hey, this is Arun. I'm the engineering manager on IMC Supervisor working out of Bangalore.
Excellent. So, today we're here to talk about IMC Supervisor version 1.1, as we said. And before we start the conversation around this new 1.1 version, Jeff, can you give us a quick recap of what was delivered in the IMC Supervisor 1.0?
Sure. So, because everything that's in the new product includes everything in 1.0, we should certainly cover that. The 1.0 product included a number of capabilities, including platform monitoring, the ability to collect faults across many systems and aggregate them in one place. Platform inventory, allowing customers the ability to have all inventory information in the same place. KVM launch and power controls. Firmware management, so the ability to distribute firmware across multiple systems through our non-interactive HEU, and then email alerting. In the event that customers have alerts on their systems and want proactive notification, we do support email of those notifications to the end customers.
That's a great list, Jeff. Can you highlight, now for the customers, what is new in version 1.1?
Sure. So enhancing on a couple of the capabilities in 1.0, the first is email alerting. So email alerting enhancements include the ability to configure multiple profiles. So if you want to have an administrator that has email alerts configured for a particular severity or for a particular server or set of servers, the new email profile capability gives you granularity of individual severity levels and also individual groups. So you could have an administrator that has very, very granular email notifications. The second is related to firmware management. So with firmware management, we've made it even easier to pull down Cisco firmware images from cco.com. So by entering your Cisco credentials, your CCO credentials, we now enable directly from Supervisor the ability to download firmware bundles, and that just streamlines the process. You can download right from the interface, and it'll present you a list of the available images right from your system. So that's another new capability. And then third is hardware profiles, or the ability to configure a server through a policy framework, either with one or more profiles. So that's really the major feature, a major thrust of the 1.1 offering that we're going to talk with you a lot more about this morning.
Great, thank you. So I know we went over the product use cases and the last Tech Talk, which is posted on Communities. But I was wondering, what's changed with this new version as far as use cases? What kinds of, customer benefits are we seeing with IMC Supervisor? Can you tell us just a little about the actual use cases and the implementations that our customers are doing for the product?
Yeah, so we're seeing customers across both the C-Series, our rack mount servers, as well as the E-Series servers, and these are servers that fit in the back of ISR routers. Adopting IMC Supervisor, in particular where they're running remote office, branch office operations and need a small number of systems for, say, file and print services. So that's a use case we've seen strong adoption for. Another one that we've seen very strong adoption for is retail, where we've got customers that might have just one or two systems per site, and and then they want to be able to manage them from a single pane of glass. And then we do have customers that are running these in more traditional environments, but I would say that the key adoption point is the retail, the remote office, branch office, or the agencies. If you were looking at an E-Series platform where you might have just an ISR and one or two of those very small E-Series servers in the ISR.
Okay, great. So, Jeff talked about the hardware policies and the profiles. Arun, can you tell us more about some of the technical details, right? I mean, what are the differences between policies and profiles, for example?
Sure. Yeah, so the policy-based framework that we have, right, essentially abstracts the hardware constructs on the standalone C and ECD servers. Right? So what this essentially means is that the hardware attributes of the server are now configured using policies. Simply stated, a policy is basically a categorical grouping and classification of various constructs, right, in terms of configuration constructs that we have. An example would be things like BIOS settings, for example, the LDAP groups and the users, for example, that can access the standalone server. I mean, and those kinds of things. I mean, what you can logically group into sets of configurable elements, those would constitute pretty much what a policy is. Right? These policies can then be applied either to a server or a group of servers. So you kind of do a bulk deployment as well. So the framework, in some sense, right, kind of you can visualize this in two different forms. Right? One is the creation of the policy itself. And this we can do in two forms. And either you go step by step, click through it, and then go ahead and configure it. Or you can create it from an existing server, right? So you kind of have a golden server against which I kind of import the whole thing. And then what we do is step two is the actual policy deployment of a single policy, right, to one or more servers, right, concurrently. And that is pretty much what a policy is, right? Whereas a profile itself can be thought of as a bundle of policies, so like grouping of a bunch of policies together. You can think of that as a profile. Again, profile deployment also can be done concurrently on one or more servers. So what this means is in a profile, you can pretty much cherry pick a certain policy or a desired group of policies, for example, and we call this a profile. And that is then applied to one or more servers. And this brings the server into compliance for a desired configuration that we have. So essentially, this feature also helps you to deploy. First of all, you can do the initial configuration and deployment effectively, and I can roll it out across multiple systems. The other thing that you can do is that you can think of this as a very efficient way to bring servers into compliance. Like once you brought this out, you can make a change and then again do a deploy across them.
Excellent. Okay. So a profile is essentially a bundle of policies then, Arun? I mean, could you kind of tell us what policies are supported in this new version then, if I've got that right?
Yep. So I will just quickly share something that kind of summarizes the whole thing in terms of what are different policies, I mean, the profiles that we have. So while that comes up, I mean, essentially you can think of the policies that we have into, you can think of them as two sets of things that we, two categories in some sense, right? Essentially we have the platform-based settings, right? Things like the BIOS policy, the boot order, the RIG configuration, the RAID configuration on it. All of these, you can think of these as, one group of, policies which are categorized in some sense as a platform set, right? Another set essentially is the administrative settings on that server, right? User groups, LDAP servers, SNMP configuration, NTV, all of these would kind of categorize and fall under the bucket of, admin settings on the server pretty much.
So, I mean, it really sounds similar to the concept of service profiles in UCS, and UCS Manager, right? I mean, how do hardware profiles and our hardware policies and profiles in IMC Supervisor really compare against service profiles from UCS Manager?
Right, that's a great question because I mean one of the first obvious points of compare is how does this work or compare to say usage manager and the service profile concept that we have. The one key difference really is the fact that the service profile in usage manager is much more long-lived. When we say long-lived, essentially what we mean is that in the case of IMC Supervisor, we work with what we call the fire once and forget paradigm, right? And unlike that, on usage manager, right, so you have defined a service profile, and we have an inbuilt compliance engine in some sense, which kind of rolls out the service profile across. So to kind of take a step back, see, for example, if you take a hardware profile and you kind of roll it out to associated set of servers, what you can do is you can go and change the configuration on the policy that you have. It would not automatically trigger and roll it out across the servers that we have already deployed, for example, right? But that's not the case with Usage Manager, especially stuff like updating templates that we have in Usage Manager and the policies on associated service profiles. The change to the policy kind of rolls out across all these servers that we have already associated with. So the difference, essentially, what I'm saying is that in the IMC Supervisor, the user intervention is required to manually trigger the application of a policy or profile as and when needed. The other difference, in some sense, is that UCSM has what we call finite state machines, right? And we have a desired state configuration that the usage manager kind of has it. I mean, you can think of this as the compliance manager I was talking about earlier. So you have a series of finite state machine stages, and those have associated retries and stuff like that. So essentially, it is like a punch list of various tasks, which takes us to compliance. Whereas in IMC Supervisor, it's basically you have a series of policies on a profile. When we roll this out, and say for example one of them fails, the next stage still goes ahead. Whereas, as I said in UCS Manager, we have stages and have the compliance in terms of retries and things like that. So we don't have retries. Essentially, what this means is more of the follow-up in terms of making sure that the policy has successfully rolled out. A lot of that moves to user control. The other thing that it does is this allows us for, enables, I would say, more scale that we have.
Okay, interesting, good. So, now that we kind of understand the concept of IMC Supervisor hardware profiles, Arun, can you explain how it works under the covers? You've already talked a little bit about how it gets applied, but can you talk about, what this kind of architecture really enables, or what the architecture, underneath how this does the profiles from what a lot of people think is, rack mount servers without differentiation, and how are we taking advantage of profiles, and how does that work with Cisco?
Sure. So one of the things that we need to kind of understand with respect to how IMC Supervisor works in general is that we rely a lot on the XML API that standalone IMC provides today. So what we do is we have, for example, built completely on top of that XML API layer. What that means, though, is that we have two things that we need to kind of think about here. One is the XML API layer has built-in a lot of properties and managed objects that it exposes, and we have a built-in we have schema that gets published as part of the XML API layer. What we do as part of engineering is work on top of the schema. The initial build out on top of the schema and build out layers on top of it. What that means is that we are able to kind of generate a lot of things that that constitute what a profile or a policy is. Things like the properties of the profile, the validation that goes with it. All of that is kind of generated and used. And as we go into kind of the deployment, let me know if you can see the slides.
Yes, we can. If you can move over to the second.
Yeah. So essentially, when we think of how we kind of deploy this out, we start with understanding that when we start to roll out policies onto a policy-based configuration, we start with what we think is the golden server, right? So essentially, we have a server where we configure all of the policies and profiles, and we start the process of connecting over the XML API layer that I was talking about. And once we connect, right, we kind of query the server for all of the policies or all of the things that have been configured on the server. Things like BIOS, boot order, big configuration, the entire work that we talked about earlier. So we kind of query the server, and so we kind of query the server and import one or more policies and profiles. So as we start to kind of import this, what we do is we kind of build up that state and configuration in the IMC Supervisor itself. And what this does is that we kind of start to absorb this configuration into a profile, and then we start a rollout. So essentially, we take this and then start to deploy this. We modify the policies if required, for example. Maybe you want to tweak something, tune a few options on the particular policies, and then we start to deploy the profile onto one or more servers. And then that kind of rolls this out one by one across servers at a scale. And kind of that is how we kind of roll this whole thing out onto multiple servers.
That's great. So Nitya, are you going to walk us through this in a demo now?
Sure, Kevin. But before I run through the demo, I want to give a background to the kinds of environment that I have in my lab. So I have two servers. The first server has the golden configurations, has all of the desirable configs in terms of storage and wake. These are the two use cases that I'll be demonstrating. And the server 2 does not have the desirable configuration. In my experiment, I'm going to get the second server to look very much similar or even identical to server 1. And having said that, let me quickly do a screen share. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So let's look at the first server, which is sitting at .96 IP address. And I told you that this machine has the desired configurations in terms of storage. Let's look at the storage policies first. So I'm logging into the system at the .96 using my admin credentials. And as soon as I move over to the storage tab and look at the physical drive info, I see that all of the health status shows good. 2 of them are online, whereas everything else is unconfigured good. I move over to the virtual drive info and I see that RAID 1 is getting configured using the first 2 drives in the slot 1 and 2. And then as you can see here, RAID level says 1, and then looks like this virtual drive is also set to boot. Now, having verified this, let's move over and look at my second machine here, server 2, that is sitting at the .97. It does not have the desired configuration. Let's take a look at what is in the system. Again, I use my admin credentials to log into the SimC GUI. If I go over to the storage tab and move over to physical drive, I see everything in unconfigured good status. Health is good, but everything is unconfigured good, and as a result, I don't see any virtual drives at all. Now let's try and bring the .97 to look very similar to the .96 setup that I have. Let's see how we can create and apply a RAID policy. I'm logging into the IMC Supervisor environment, again using admin credentials, and I'm greeted with the dashboard screen. As I move over to policies and the Manage tab, I'm able to see all of the available policies. And if you were to start fresh with IMC Supervisor, you will see a clean slate here. You won't see any of the policies that are being listed here. You will see a clean slate. I have done a lot of experiments, and so have my colleagues at work. So you're seeing all of these policies getting listed here. And now for the purpose of demonstration, let's go ahead and create a RAID policy. I'm going to give it a golden RAID as a name. And as you can see here, you have the ability to create policy from a current configuration or the desirable server like I was talking to you about. So if I click Next, I'm presented with two options. And as soon as you've identified the golden server, you can go ahead and enter the details of the server manually, or you can go ahead and pull it up from one of the systems in your IMC Supervisor environment. I'm going to show you the options again. If you choose to enter manually, you have to enter the server IP and the credentials. If not, as it is for the purpose of the demo, I'm picking the first server. As you can see, it's the .96 at building 18, and I'm pulling it. What happens as soon as I click Next is you see the status here that says checking connection details. And I mentioned that if you were to enter your details manually, you have to enter an IP address and credentials. What happens in the background is IMC Supervisor is trying to validate across a particular IMC using those credentials. And as soon as it is verified, it's going ahead and collecting all of the policies relating to RAID in our case. So that's where you will see the status saying in progress as it continues to collect inventory for RAID, specific to RAID. And once that finishes, you're presented with whatever the details IMC Supervisor collects from the SIMC endpoint. And you're also presented with additional tasks. For the purpose of demonstration, I'm not going to do any additional tasks. I'm just going to submit it as it is. And as you can see, under the RAID policy folder here, I'm able to see the golden RAID that I created. And I will go ahead and apply it. And as you can see, I have the ability to apply this one snapshotted golden RAID configuration across server groups, right? Or across multiple servers. For the purpose of the demonstration, I'm going to use a particular server. The .97 that we were talking about did not have the desired configurations. So I'm going to apply it to the .97 system. And once I've verified that, I'm going to click Submit. And if I move over and click to View Details, looks like the RAID policy application initialized. And if I give it a couple more minutes, I see a success message getting returned to IMC Supervisor. Let's go ahead and verify this. In the .97 system, I move over to the Storage tab, and I already see my first two disks says online, which is good news. And I'm going to move over to Virtual Drive, and voila, I have RAID 1 configured for the both disks in slot 1 and 2. And I do see the health as good, and I do see the boot drive set to true. And now this is just one example, right? I want to show and highlight another example real quick. Let's quickly run through the other use case that I was talking about.
Apply to a single server or to a server group. And, you know, you got a lot of flexibility as far as how you group those, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I'm going to be talking about how the meaningful group creation becomes very essential, and it's kind of how you start with and then build on top. Say, for examples, I'll be covering that in a later section where, you know, email alerts, for example, if you create a meaningful server group, it's going to help you there as well. But we'll cover that in a later section. But as I've pulled, we saw the storage configuration. Let's take a look at WIC policy. And before I run through this demo again, I want to make sure that I give a background as to what I'm going to be doing. So again, I'm going to be having two systems here. One will be a desired state, and the other one will be a not so much of a desired state. And in this case, I'm not going to bring the systems ideal or very identical to each other. Instead, I'm going to change the configuration on the fly and see how it gets applied across to the destination server. With that said, I'm going to start showing you the configuration at my machine at .96 IP address. Again, logging into the SIMC. And this time, I will be going over the inventory option here, and then look at the Cisco WIC adapters. And here I see three Ethernet added here. We know that ETH0 and ETH1 is the default that comes with the WIC, but then ETH2 is something that the .96 environment has, and it has been custom created. And that is set to uplink port 0, as you can notice. Now let's look at my second server, which is at .97, and it does not have the desired configuration. And we'll verify that in just a second.
Nithya. Jeff or Arun, are you seeing the demo? Okay, I think it stopped sharing, Nithya.
Yeah, not that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I can fix that. Let me quickly do a screen share again. Yes, I'm glad you interrupted me.
There we go.
So now, is it perfect?
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the steps real quick again. So let's take a look at the first server here at .96 environment. Seeing is believing, right? So let's see it for real this time. So in the server tab, I move over to inventory. I look at the Cisco WIC adapters and move on to the VNIC tab. Here, I'm seeing two ETH0 and ETH1, which is the default that comes with the WIC adapter, whereas ETH2 is custom created for the .96 server, and it is set to uplink port 0. Now let's take a look at the second server, which does not have the desired configuration, and it's sitting at .97 IP address. I log into the SIMC GUI using the admin credentials. If I move over to the inventory and take a look at the Cisco WIC adapters, I see only the defaults. I don't see the custom ETH2 that is set to uplink port 0. Having seen this, let's see how we can tune the .97 server to look somewhat identical to my .96 machine. And as I said, I'm going to tweak some configuration on the fly here. So I log into IMC Supervisor, go to Policies, and go to the Manage tab. I see all of the policies getting listed here. Now I have to choose the WIC policy. And I'm going to name it the Golden WIC. Again, I'm presented with the option of configuring it from a current server. And I'm choosing the running .96 machine. Again, I'm also presented with the option to enter it manually. In this case, I'm not going to. I'm just going to cherry pick the .96 environment that I just showed you a second before. And as soon as I click Next, it's the same story. IMC Supervisor is validating the IP address and credentials in the background as we speak using the XML API, just like Arun mentioned. And once it is able to authenticate, it's pulling up all of the relevant WIC adapter information from the .96 environment. As you can see here, if I go ahead and edit it, I'm able to see all of the options that were already available in .96. I'm seeing the ETH0, 1, which are the defaults, and I'm also seeing the ETH2, which was custom created. Now, I'm going to do something differently. I'm going to create another VNIC. And I'm going to name it ETH3 and leave everything else default. And I'm going to submit that. So in this case, you're able to see two more custom VNICs. And this is slightly different from the .96 environment as well, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and submit it. And once I submit, the Golden WIC shows up, and I'm able to, again, specify that across multiple server groups, like Kevin mentioned, and then we also have the ability to cherry pick a particular server to apply it to. In this case, I choose, as you can see, you have the ability to cherry pick multiple servers as well, not just server groups. So that's the level of granularity that we are providing with version 1.1. And then for the purpose of demo, I'm going to choose .97. As soon as I click Submit here, the policy is getting applied. and you're seeing the initialization status message. And if I give it some more time, I will see a success message back. And let's go ahead and verify it on the .97 environment. Inventory, Cisco WIC adapters, and VNIC tab clearly shows not just ETH0, ETH1 like it had previously, ETH2, which came from the .96 environment, and the ETH3 that we added on the fly from IMC Supervisor as well. And that is set to all of the defaults, which is uplink port 0, as you can see. So this concludes my second demonstration, and this clearly tells you, how you can see this in action, right? You're able to export, import, make two servers identical, two or many in your environment. And the second use case also demonstrated how you can export a configuration and you can change the configurations on the fly before firing that shot to one or multiple servers.
Great.
Thanks, Kevin.
So you talked about, sort of storage and RAID. You talked about VIC. Can you show us an example of the hardware, how you build the policy, bundle the policy, and make it into what a hardware policy? I guess a hardware profile is really what we're making, right?
Excellent question, Kevin. Oftentimes, in a large deployment, which is the typical use case that IMC Supervisor is trying to solve, right, at scale, managing SIMCs at scale. So oftentimes, bundling policies really help. In this case, we've seen that I configured two policies, right, the Golden RAID and the Golden VIC. We'll see how we can bundle that and much more to form a hardware profile. So that's the background to this demonstration, and I'm going to share my screen. Can you see this?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So this time I'm just going to log into IMC Supervisor using my admin credentials. And this is the usual drill. The user gets greeted with the dashboards. And I move over to policies, which is of interest to us. And I'm making sure all of the policies that I created exists. It's not going away. And then I move over to server profiles. And for the purpose of consistency, I'm going to just call it Golden Server Profile. And I have the ability to snapshot all of, or the bundle of policies from a current configuration of the server. But for the purpose of demo, I'm going to use what I've already created. So let me go ahead and start bundling up the policies. I'm going to start with BIOS. I made an extra policy called the Golden BIOS, as you can see the policy name here. And I'm also picking up the NTP policy, and I've called it Golden NTP. And I'm also going to add whatever we saw in my previous demo, which is the RAID. And the VIC as well.
Now you got to add Golden VIC.
Yes, the Golden VIC, exactly.
Finish it out.
So we have the Golden bundle here. And after I've verified everything, I'm going to click Submit. And I've added it. If I expand the server profile folder here, I'm able to see the Golden server profile that I just created. And again, like you brought it up, Kevin, we have the granularity level to apply it to a server group or cherry pick a bunch of servers, right? In this case, I'm going to target my victim machine here, which is .97, and go ahead and submit. And if I go to view details here, I'm seeing that everything is getting initialized simultaneously. It is not linear, and I'm also seeing all of the policy names that this particular profile has. And if I give it a couple more minutes, and I see the success message getting returned to me. So this is really the power of what we have done with the hardware policies and profiles with the version 1.1. With the ability to bundle up multiple policies, we have the ability to roll out a fully customizable configuration to multiple servers and bring them into compliance.
That's great. So, let's talk about some of the enhancements made in this version. I know we talked about firmware, and everybody loves firmware, and so Nithya, talk about how what some of the new capabilities are with firmware for IMC Supervisor 1.1. Because if you're getting many of these, you're grouping them together. How does the firmware management and that feature set look to evolve?
Right, Kevin, spot on. Everybody loves firmware enhancements, right? So with version 1.0, it was kind of a primitive release, right? We had to get our foot in the door, say that, IMC Supervisor does support firmware management. But with 1.1, we've gotten one step closer, and we've kind of eliminated a bunch of steps that typically, admins go through. As an admin, I would go to cisco.com, kind of look at the product or the platform name, fish for the available firmware revisions and kind of cherry pick them, download them, put them in a FTP or a NFS CIF share and whatnot, right? So with version 1.1, what we've really done is eliminated all of the manual steps that are required since the time the user starts, going to cisco.com up until the time he downloads the image, right? We've automated all of that. IMC Supervisor 1.1 is kind of much more intelligent now, if you will. So Jeff touched upon the point where, customers can use their cisco.com or the CCO credentials, right? So if you go ahead and use your CCO credentials directly on IMC Supervisor, what happens is IMC Supervisor authenticates you against cisco.com, and then it presents you with the option to choose a particular platform, right? You have several form factors for SIMC today, and the user can cherry pick the platform of interest, if you will. And then once he chooses that, IMC Supervisor is intelligent enough to kind of present to him the options available for that particular platform. All of the compatible firmware images presented to him. Think of it like a catalog, right, for per platform, grouped per platform. And then once he cherry picks a particular image that he wants to use for his environment, once he saves it, IMC Supervisor goes one step beyond, not just marks the image, but downloads it into the database, the internal database that IMC Supervisor comes with today. So when it goes one step beyond like that, it makes it super handy and very easy to deploy mass firmware upgrades across multiple servers. So at scale, you can think of how easy it becomes when you eliminate, simple steps like that.
No, this is great, right? I mean, this is really what we've had enjoyed in our service profiles in our blades and our B series, and customers love, is to be able to grab that, from a repository and apply it to the groups of servers that, because you're going to QA some servers and they're going to be on a different revision, but the ones that have already been passed, they could be on an earlier revision. So this is great news. So, what other significant enhancements went into this release? I know you mentioned earlier a couple times email alerts. Can you talk about that?
Correct, Kevin. I know Jeff touched upon, what are the enhancements that we made on email alerting. So again, version 1.0 was primitive. It had a limited support for call home alerting features. So with 1.1, I think of 3 points, right? Overall, overarching message here for email alerting is that we've enabled more granularity, right? As opposed to broader, everybody gets everything, every alert kind of a thing. We've moved away from that. We've given more granularity. That is the overarching message. But think of it in terms of severity, right? An admin going to IMC Supervisor and kind of subscribing to a particular severity. We have fault severity ranging from info all the way up until critical, right? Major, minor, all of that. So if everybody gets everything, it's not very ideal, right? So with version 1.1, what we have done is given the ability for the users to kind of go ahead and cherry pick the severity level he wants to listen to, if you will. So I, as an admin, I can subscribe to just critical and major warning and need not look at minor and info level warnings. And again, like I said, the second major thing that you to consider is applying this email alerting rules, if you will, to a particular server group or across all servers in the system.
Yeah, that's the key, right? Because the people who are, those servers are running production and pushing up to a knock, they're going to have different, sensitivities than somebody who's in QA or in test dev, right? So again, you can group it, make that part of your policy, essentially, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So that is why, when you deploy or when you bring in systems into IMC Supervisor, you want to think about the way you group them. So server groups come into play in terms of policies and profiles, like you mentioned. Like Jeff mentioned, like I ran through the demo, and Arun also mentioned the technical details. So you can really see the, how you can take advantage of the server groupings, that we have today. So that is the second major enhancement that went into, email alerts. And finally, I also want to mention that we have the ability to create multiple email alerting rules, not just one, but multiple, and you can turn them on, all of them simultaneously, and that's kind of the overarching message. So with everything, the knobs like choosing the severity level, choosing server group or across all the servers in your environment, and enabling multiple rules and turning them on simultaneously, you have a lot more granularity, which we did not have in 1.0.
Now, this is great, right? I mean, this gets back to what Arun was saying about it being an API-driven infrastructure where, not only can we apply the rules, but we can actually have multiple rules for different times and run them simultaneously so that you can truly filter through what's noise and what's legitimate to be concerned about. That's great. That's great. So Jeff, we heard a lot about the IMC 1.1 release. What else has the team been up to? What else? What's coming on the horizon, and what else are you guys working on?
Yeah. So what's that one more thing? We've got a couple of other things that the team's been really busy working on. So we talked a lot about the policy framework here today, and specifically what's coming in 1.1. There were a few features that we wanted to get into 1.1, but from a timing standpoint, we've split off and are just about to release in a patch coming up here in the very near future. So just to give you a preview of where we're headed with that, some capabilities, I'll tell you a few, I'll keep a few secrets so you can check it out for yourself. But multi-select edit. So if one of the things that we covered in our 1.0 Tech Talk in detail is the ability to manage power and KVM, and that happened largely on an individual basis. So you could select a server in the monitoring tab and then power it on. But that required iterative processes if you wanted to turn on, say, 10 or 15 servers through your remote console. So that multi-select edit capability for power controls and KVM something that we're including. Warning before the firmware updates. So we talked a little bit about the firmware updates and how we're making it very easy and streamlined for users to download that image from CCO and then push that out inside their environment. So with great power comes great responsibility and a warning in this case. So just letting customers know that firmware deployment, because of the mechanisms we're using with our NIHU, or non-interactive host update utility, will require an outage to consume the new BIOS and some of the firmware. So we've got a warning there for customers. Tagging. So tagging is a concept we also covered in 1.1. But it allows metadata to be associated with a server, so we're allowing that now at the global perspective, of the global groups. And then the last item, due to popular demand and feedback from customers who have deployed, including support for Hyper-V. So today we're supporting VMware. We're expanding support to include the Hyper-V platform. So that's what we've got coming in the near future. And then one other item worth mentioning is actually related to UCS Director. So UCS Director is a larger orchestration product that encompasses far more capabilities. But because of the commonality in the framework between Supervisor and Director, and the enhancements that we've made here, we've actually pulled those enhancements into the Director product offering. So for those customers that have server licenses for Director, you'll be able to take advantage of Supervisor. And going forward, we will continue to enhance Supervisor on one track, and then as warranted, pull those features across into UCS Director to make sure that for that premium orchestration data center level tool, we have equivalent capabilities that customers who are running IMC Supervisor are able to benefit from. So just providing more consistency across the portfolio in our interfaces.
Yeah, that's great, Jeff. So if I'm an interested customer, where do I go to get started? How do I go and download this and get rolling?
So best place to go is Cisco.com. In the past, we've offered, so in the 1.0 product, we had a 60-day trial for 50 servers. We have continued with that in 1.1, the difference being that the license capability is embedded, and that capability starts on deployment. So if you want to go out, kick the tires, start to work with the policies and profiles as Nitya had showed, on a limited time, limited scope basis, we do support that. So you can get an understanding of the capabilities, become familiar with the interfaces, and be able to do that without a separate license key. So for those customers that are interested, I encourage you, whether you're running VMware today or Hyper-V with the upcoming patch release, go ahead, download it from Cisco and get started. So that's the call to action this morning.
Full-on version. I mean, I'm not getting a reduced version as an evaluation. I'm actually going to get all the features we talked about.
Exactly. That includes the advanced feature set, including the policy framework, and hardware profiles.
That's outstanding. Well, good. Well, really like to thank everybody for joining today. We sped it up a little bit, and everybody go to the communities.cisco.com site. We've got all kinds of outstanding information out there, not just on IMC Supervisor, but on all our policy-driven products. And it's really a great, back and forth for other users to really interact and get the right settings and bits, and it's truly a community. So I'd like to thank Arun and Nitya and Jeff for joining us today and providing color on what's really evolving into a fantastic tool, especially with this 1.1 release, IMC Supervisor and the API-driven hardware profile capabilities for rack mounts. Customers have been looking for this for years. We want that UCS, that blade type of experience with our rack mount servers. And as you see, a lot of work and engineering is going into this, and so we're really proud of this tool. So with that, I just would like to thank everybody for joining. This recording will be posted on Communities. And Jeff said you can get the bits on Cisco.com, and we point to the emulator and a lot of other things from Communities as well. I'd just like to say thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kevin.